The scent of pine resin hung thick in the Oregon air as Eliza Hartwell stumbled through the logging camp, her boots caked with mud from 3 days of walking. The massive timber operation sprawled before her like a small town, bunkhouses, a cookhouse, stacks of felled giants waiting for the mill. Her stomach cramped with hunger so fierce she thought she might faint right there among the wood shavings. She clutched the silver locket at her throat, the only thing her mother had left her before the fever took her last winter. Her father had drunk himself to death shortly after, leaving Eliza with nothing but debts and Silas Wickham's cruel proposition. Marry him and the debts disappear. Refuse and she'd starve. She'd chosen starvation and fled in the night. Before we continue with Eliza's desperate journey, I want to ask you something important. If you're enjoying this story, please take a moment to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and give this video a like. It truly means everything to us and motivates us to bring you more quality stories like this one. Also, I'd love to know, where are you listening from right now? Are you at home, on a drive, or maybe working? Drop a comment and let me know. Now, back to Eliza's story. The camp foreman, a wiry man with suspicious eyes, blocked her path to the cookhouse. "We don't need no women here causing trouble." "I'm not here to cause trouble," Eliza said, her voice cracking. "I can cook, clean, mend, anything. I just need work and a place to sleep. Gotta cook already." His eyes dropped to her locket. "That silver, though, might buy you a hot meal and a night in the supply shed." Her fingers tightened around the locket, the cool metal warming against her palm. It was all she had left of her mother, of love, of a time before everything turned dark. But 3 days without food had hollowed her out, made her desperate enough to consider impossible things. "How much food?" she whispered. A shadow fell across them both, so large it seemed to swallow the afternoon sun. Eliza looked up and up and up. The man towering above her stood at least 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to span the width of the path. His arms, bare to the elbow where his wool shirt was rolled up, were thick with muscle that spoke of years swinging axes and hauling timber. Dark hair fell past his collar, and a beard covered the lower half of his face, but it was his eyes that caught her, deep brown, sad, and somehow gentle despite his fearsome size. "Silver isn't what's needed here, miss," he said, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder. "Looks like what you need is food, shelter, and safety. I can provide all three if you're willing to work honest." The foreman stepped back. "Now, hold on, Gideon. I'm short a cook since McCreary broke his arm yesterday," the giant said, not taking his eyes off Eliza. "This lady looks like she knows her way around a kitchen, and God knows your biscuits could double as paving stones, Dutch." Despite her exhaustion, Eliza felt a flicker of amusement at the foreman's indignant expression. "I can cook," she said. "My mother taught me. I can make biscuits that actually rise, stews that stick to your ribs, and pies from whatever fruit's in season." Gideon nodded once, decisive. "Then the job's yours. Pays $2 a week, plus room and board. You'll have the small cabin behind the cookhouse. It's got a good lock, and you'll be the only one with the key. Any man who bothers you answers to me. We clear?" The last part he directed at Dutch and the gathering crowd of loggers who'd stopped work to gawk. Several men nodded quickly, and Eliza noticed how they respected this giant's authority. Not feared exactly, but respected deeply. "Why?" Eliza asked, surprised by her own boldness. "You don't know me. I could be a thief or worse. Could be, Gideon agreed. But I know desperation when I see it, and I know the difference between someone running from trouble and someone who is trouble. You're running. The question is, do you want to stop running? Tears burned behind Eliza's eyes, but she blinked them back. She'd cried enough in the past months to last a lifetime. Yes, she said, I want to stop. Then welcome to the Timber Giant Logging Company. I'm Gideon Thorne, and I own this operation. Let's get you fed before you blow away in the wind. The cabin was small but clean, with a real bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the forest. After Gideon had shown her to the cookhouse and watched her eat 2 bowls of stew and half a loaf of bread, he'd brought her here and left her with a simple rest tonight. Work starts at dawn. But Eliza couldn't rest. Her body was exhausted, but her mind kept circling back to the massive man who'd shown her kindness when she expected none. She'd seen how the other men worked. Gideon didn't just own the operation, he worked it. While other timber barons stayed in fancy offices, Gideon Thorne was out among the trees, his axe singing through wood that would take 2 normal men to fell. She watched from her window as the sun set, painting the stumps and standing timber in shades of orange and gold. This was a hard land for hard people, and she would have to become harder still to survive it. But for the first time in months, she felt something besides fear and hunger. She felt hope. Dawn came cold and gray, mist rising from the earth like ghosts. Eliza was already in the cookhouse, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back in a practical bun. She'd found flour, lard, salt, and buttermilk, and her hands remembered the rhythm her mother had taught her. Fold, press, turn, fold again. The biscuits went into the oven just as the first loggers stumbled in, rubbing sleep from their eyes. By the time Gideon arrived, the breakfast spread was impressive. Fluffy biscuits, fried salt pork, scrambled eggs, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The men ate with single-minded focus, and the compliments came grudgingly but genuinely. These biscuits could make a man weep, said a grizzled logger named Finn. Where'd you learn to cook like this? My mother, Eliza said simply. She believed food was love made tangible. Gideon ate quietly at the far end of the table. But she felt his gaze on her several times. When the men filed out to begin the day's work, he remained behind, his large frame making the bench look like child's furniture. You did well, he said. The men are already saying you're the best cook we've had. It's just food, Eliza said, suddenly shy under his direct attention. It's care, Gideon corrected. There's a difference between filling bellies and feeding souls. You do the latter. She busied herself with clearing plates, unsure how to respond to such praise. Will you tell me about the operation? If I'm to work here, I should understand it. Over the next hour, as Eliza cleaned and prepared for the midday meal, Gideon talked. His voice was measured and thoughtful, nothing like Silas Wickham's sharp, cutting tones. He explained how they selectively logged, taking only mature trees and leaving the young to grow. How he paid his men fair wages and insisted on safety measures that other operations scorned as expensive. A man's life is worth more than timber, he said. My father didn't believe that. He worked men to death and thought nothing of it. When he passed and left me this company, I swore I'd do different. That's admirable, Eliza said. Most men would just take the profit. Most men didn't watch their brother die under a widowmaker, because the boss was too cheap to clear the deadwood properly. His jaw tightened. Jacob was 19, had his whole life ahead of him. "I'm sorry," Eliza said softly. "Loss leaves holes in us that never quite fill." Gideon looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw recognition in his eyes, the acknowledgement of one wounded soul seeing another. "Yes," he said, "it does." The days fell into a rhythm. Eliza rose before dawn, baked and cooked, and managed the cookhouse with quiet efficiency. The men treated her with respect, partly because she earned it, and partly because they knew Gideon Thorne would personally throw anyone who disrespected her into the river. But it was the evenings she came to treasure most. After supper, when the men retired to their bunkhouse for cards and tall tales, Gideon would often linger in the cookhouse, ostensibly checking supplies, but really just talking with Eliza as she cleaned. "You never told me what you're running from," he said one night, about 2 weeks into her employment. Eliza's hands stilled in the washwater. She'd known this question would come eventually. "A man named Silas Wickham. He held my father's debts and decided I was suitable payment." Gideon's hands curled into fists on the table. "And you refused." "I'd rather starve than belong to a man like that." She resumed washing, the motions giving her something to focus on besides the old fear. "He's cruel. I saw how he treated his first wife before she died. Some said it was fever that took her, but I saw the bruises." "Did he follow you?" "I don't know. I covered my tracks as best I could, but Silas is persistent. He doesn't like losing what he considers his." "You're not his," Gideon said with quiet intensity. "You're not property. You're a person. If he comes here, he'll find that some things are worth fighting for." The certainty in his voice should have frightened her. Violence promised, even in her defense. But instead, she felt safe, protected, valued. "Why do you care?" she asked, turning to face him. "You barely know me." Gideon stood, and in the lamplight, his shadow stretched across the floor like a sentinel. "I see a woman worth saving," he said simply. "More than that, I see a woman who saved herself, who just needed a safe place to land. That takes courage." He left before she could respond, but his words echoed in the quiet cookhouse long after. A month into her tenure, disaster struck. One of the younger loggers, eager to prove himself, miscalculated a fall. The massive Douglas fir twisted as it came down, and Gideon, working nearby, shoved 2 men clear just as the trunk's crown caught him across the shoulder and chest, slamming him to the ground. Eliza heard the shouts from the cookhouse and ran, her heart in her throat. They'd carried Gideon to his own cabin, the largest in the camp, and the camp's medic, such as he was already examining him. "Ribs cracked for certain," the medic said, probing Gideon's side while the big man gritted his teeth. "Maybe broken, shoulders wrenched. He needs rest, ice from the cold house, and bandaging tight enough to keep the ribs stable." "I can do that," Eliza said, surprising herself. "I nursed my mother through her final illness. I know how to care for the wounded." The medic looked relieved. "Better you than me trying to wrestle him into staying still. Gideon Thorne is the worst patient God ever made." The men filed out, leaving Eliza alone with her injured employer. Gideon's shirt was torn, revealing the massive expanse of his chest and the dark bruising already blooming across his ribs. He was breathing shallowly, each inhale clearly painful. "You should rest," Eliza said, pulling a chair close to the bed. "Doctor's orders." "Since when is old Peterson a doctor?" Gideon growled, but there was no heat in it. Pain had leached the color from his face. "Since he's all we've got." She stood to fetch the bandages and ice. I'm going to need to wrap your ribs. It's going to hurt. Everything already hurts, he admitted. Do what you need to. As gently as she could, Eliza wrapped the bandages around his massive torso, her hands steady despite her racing heart. This close, she could see the scars that marked him, old injuries from years of dangerous work. Each one told a story of survival, of a man who led from the front and bore the consequences. These hands have felled forests, she whispered, carefully positioning the ice against the worst of the bruising. Gideon's eyes opened, holding hers. Even in pain, they were alert, present. But only with you do they tremble, he said quietly. The admission hung between them, vulnerable and true. Eliza's breath caught. She'd felt the connection growing between them. The way their conversations stretched longer each evening, how his gaze would linger when he thought she wasn't looking. But this was different. This was acknowledgement, confession. Why? She asked, her hand still resting against his chest, feeling the strong beat of his heart beneath the bandages. Because you matter, Gideon said. Because somewhere in the past month, you stopped being my cook and started being everything. Because when that tree came down, my first thought wasn't the pain. It was that I might not see you again. Tears spilled down Eliza's cheeks before she could stop them. I can't. I don't know how to. Go slow, Gideon said, reaching up with his good arm to catch her hand. I'm not asking for anything but honesty. And the truth is, Eliza Hartwell, I'm falling in love with you. Have been since you stood in this camp, starving and scared, but still brave enough to demand work instead of charity. I'm so afraid, she whispered. Afraid that this is too good, that it will be taken away, that I'll wake up and find myself back in that darkness. Then we'll be afraid together, Gideon said. But we'll be together. That's what matters. She leaned down, carefully, mindful of his injuries, and pressed her forehead to his. They stayed like that for a long moment, breathing in sync. Two damaged souls finding unexpected wholeness in each other. Gideon was a terrible patient. He chafed at bed rest, tried to return to work too soon, and generally made himself a nuisance to everyone trying to help him heal. But he was docile as a lamb when Eliza tended him, accepting her care with a gratitude that touched her heart. She moved her things to his cabin to better nurse him, and if the men noticed, none dared comment. Eliza spent her days cooking for the camp and her evenings caring for Gideon, reading to him from the collection of books in his cabin, or simply sitting in comfortable silence. Tell me about your childhood, Gideon said one evening, about a week into his recovery. The good parts, before things went dark. So Eliza told him about her mother's garden, about learning to bake bread on Saturday mornings, about summer evenings when her father would play fiddle and her mother would dance. She painted pictures of happiness that felt like ancient history, a different life entirely. You'll have that again, Gideon promised. Maybe not exactly the same, but good things, light things. I swear it. How can you be so certain? Because I'll die before I let the darkness take you again. He said it simply, a statement of fact rather than dramatic declaration. You've become precious to me, Eliza. More precious than this company, this camp, any of it. That's a dangerous thing to say, she warned. I might hold you to it. I'm counting on it. As the days passed, Gideon healed. His ribs stopped aching with every breath. The bruising faded from purple to yellow to nothing. He began taking short walks around the camp, then longer ones. Eliza at his side. They would walk to the edge of the forest, where the sounds of the logging operation faded to whispers, and just exist together in the green quiet. It was on one such walk that Gideon kissed her for the first time. They'd been discussing the upcoming winter, how the camp would slow operations when the heavy snows came. And then he'd simply stopped walking, turned to her, and cupped her face in his large, calloused hands. "May I?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Please," Eliza breathed. The kiss was gentle, reverent, nothing like the rough advances she'd feared from men. Gideon kissed her like she was made of spun glass, like she was sacred. When they parted, both were trembling. "I love you," Gideon said. "I need you to know that before anything else happens. I love you, Eliza, and I want to build a life with you. But only if that's what you want too." "It's what I want," she said, certain for the first time in her life. "It's everything I want." But peace, Eliza had learned, was always temporary. 3 weeks later, Silas Wickham rode into camp. Eliza saw him first, through the cookhouse window. Her blood turned to ice. Silas sat astride a black horse, flanked by 2 rough-looking men who were clearly hired muscle. He was a handsome man in a cruel way, sharp features, cold eyes, a smile that never reached above his mouth. "Gideon," she called, her voice tight with fear. "He's here." Gideon emerged from the supply shed, took one look at the riders, and positioned himself between them and the cookhouse. The logging crew, sensing trouble, gathered behind their boss. "You're on private property," Gideon said, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "State your business or leave." "My business is that woman," Silas said, pointing at Eliza where she stood in the cookhouse doorway. "She ran off owing me a debt. I've come to collect." "She owes you nothing," Gideon said. "People aren't currency to be traded for debts. Turn around and ride back where you came from." Silas dismounted, his hired men following suit. "That's not how I see it. Her father signed a contract. She's legally bound to honor it." "A contract signed under duress isn't worth the paper it's written on," Gideon countered. "And even if it were, I'll pay whatever debt you claim. Name your price." $500, Silas said with a smirk, "plus interest. Say 700 total." It was an astronomical sum, and everyone knew it. The supposed debt couldn't have been more than $50 at most, but Gideon didn't even blink. "Done. You'll have your money within the week. Now leave." "I don't think so," Silas said, drawing a pistol. His men did the same. "See, I'm not really interested in money. I'm interested in teaching runaways what happens when they embarrass me. She made me look weak, and I can't have that." The camp went deadly still. Eliza saw Gideon's hands flex, saw the loggers behind him tense, ready for violence. But Silas had guns, and most of the crew were unarmed, their weapons stored in the bunkhouse. "You'll have to go through me," Gideon said quietly. "And brother, that's a taller order than you think." "Is that a challenge?" Silas laughed. "You're a big man, I'll grant you, but you're not faster than a bullet." "Maybe not," said a new voice. Eliza turned to see old Finn, the grizzled logger, standing at the bunkhouse door with a rifle. "But I am, and I got friends." More men appeared, armed now, flanking the cookhouse and surrounding Silas and his thugs. The odds had shifted dramatically. Silas's face went red with rage. "This isn't over. That woman belongs to me, and I'll—" He never finished the sentence. Eliza stepped forward, her fear transformed into fury. She'd spent too many months running, too many nights afraid. Here, with Gideon and the crew at her back, she found her voice. "I belong to myself," she said clearly. "I'm not property. I'm not currency. I'm a human being with rights and dignity, and I choose to stay here. If you ever come back, Silas Wickham, if you ever threaten me or mine again, these men will make sure you regret it." "You're mine?" Silas sneered. "You've spread your legs for the timber giant, then. Should have known a whore would." Gideon moved faster than a man his size had any right to. One moment he was standing still, the next his fist connected with Silas's jaw, with a crack that echoed across the camp. Silas went down hard, his pistol flying from his hand. "The lady said leave," Gideon growled, standing over the fallen man. "I suggest you listen." Silas's hired men looked at their prone employer, then at the armed loggers surrounding them, and made the smart choice. They hauled Silas onto his horse, bloody-mouthed and dazed, and rode out of camp at a gallop. The moment they disappeared into the trees, Eliza's knees went weak. Gideon caught her, his strong arms wrapping around her, holding her up when she couldn't hold herself. "You're safe," he murmured into her hair. "I've got you. You're safe." Eliza clung to him and finally let herself cry. Not from fear this time, but from relief. It was over. Her past couldn't reach her here. Not with this man and this community standing guard. That evening, after the camp had settled and the adrenaline had faded, Gideon found Eliza sitting on the porch of his cabin, wrapped in a blanket and watching the stars emerge. "I meant what I said earlier," Eliza told him as he settled beside her, the porch creaking under his weight. "About mine. These people, this place, you're mine now. I choose this. I choose you." "And I choose you," Gideon said. "Every day, every moment, I'll choose you." He pulled something from his pocket, a ring carved from wood, simple and beautiful. "I made this from a piece of the first tree I ever felled on my own. My brother Jacob helped me smooth it years ago. I've carried it since he died, a reminder of who I was and who I wanted to be." He took her hand, his massive palm dwarfing hers. "Eliza Hartwell, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me here in these woods, raise children if we're blessed with them, and grow old by my side? I can't promise it'll be easy, but I can promise I'll love you with everything I am." "Yes," Eliza said without hesitation. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The ring fit perfectly, the wood warm against her skin. Gideon kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Eliza felt the last of her fear melt away. She'd run so far, been so afraid for so long, but here in the arms of the giant lumberjack, she'd finally found home. They were married 3 days later by a traveling preacher who happened through the camp. The ceremony was simple. Eliza wore a dress borrowed from the preacher's wife, altered to fit by clever hands. Gideon wore his best clothes, his hair and beard freshly trimmed. The entire logging crew attended, and Finn cried openly when they exchanged vows. "I take you as you are," Gideon said, his voice carrying across the small assembly. "Broken pieces and all, and I give you all of me, my strength to shelter you, my hands to hold you, my heart to love you." "I take you as you are," Eliza echoed, "gentle giant with a fierce heart, and I give you all of me, my courage to match yours, my hands to heal you, my heart to treasure you." The kiss that sealed their marriage was witnessed by an entire camp of cheering loggers and blessed by the ancient trees surrounding them. That night, in Gideon's cabin, now their cabin, they came together as husband and wife. Gideon was infinitely gentle, patient with her inexperience and fear, showing her that intimacy could be beautiful rather than brutal. His large hands trembled as they touched her, his voice rough with emotion as he murmured promises against her skin. "Go slow," Eliza whispered, when the pain of new experience made her tense. "It hurts." "I'll die before I hurt you," Gideon swore, stilling immediately. "We have all the time in the world. There's no rush." They learned each other slowly, carefully, building trust with every touch. And when they finally moved together, it was with a rightness that brought tears to both their eyes. "Together," Eliza breathed as pleasure built and crested. "Together," Gideon agreed, holding her as if she was the most precious thing in the world. Because to him, she was. 5 years later, Eliza Thorne stood on the porch of the house Gideon had built for her. A real house now, not just a cabin, with glass windows and a parlor and bedrooms for the children. She watched her husband in the yard, teaching their 4-year-old son Jacob how to hold an axe properly. "Not too heavy for you?" Gideon asked, steadying the small axe in small hands. "No, Papa," Jacob said seriously. "I'm strong like you." "That you are, son. That you are." Their daughter Sarah, just turned 2, tottered over to Eliza on unsteady legs, demanding to be picked up. Eliza lifted her, settling the toddler on her hip with practiced ease. The logging operation had grown over the years. Gideon now owned 3 camps and employed over 100 men, all of whom worked under the same principles of fair pay and safe conditions. The Timber Giant Logging Company was known throughout Oregon as the best operation to work for, demanding but just, profitable but principled. And Eliza had grown too. She still cooked, but now she managed the company's books, handled correspondence, and had even started teaching the children of the logging families to read and write in a small school building Gideon had constructed. "Do you ever regret it?" Gideon asked that evening, as they sat together on the porch swing, children asleep inside. "The life you gave up to come here?" "I gave up nothing," Eliza said firmly. "I was drowning in that old life. You taught me to swim. More than that, you taught me I was worth saving." "You saved yourself," Gideon corrected, pulling her close. "I just gave you a safe place to land." "We saved each other," Eliza amended. "You were drowning too, in grief and loneliness. We pulled each other to shore." Gideon kissed the top of her head, his big hand gentle as it stroked her arm. "Best decision I ever made, offering you that job. Best decision I ever made, accepting it." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged one by one, exactly where they belonged, together, home, whole. The giant lumberjack and the woman who'd stolen his heart had built more than a logging empire. They'd built a life, a family, a legacy of love that would endure longer than any timber. And in the quiet moments, when Gideon's hands trembled as they touched his wife, they both remembered the truth, that love makes us vulnerable, but vulnerability shared becomes strength. Together, they were unbreakable. Together, they were home. The winter that followed their wedding was brutal. Snow fell thick and heavy, blanketing the camp in white silence that muffled even the sound of axes. The logging operation slowed to near stillness, and the men who remained at camp spent their days maintaining equipment and their evenings huddled around stoves, trading stories. Eliza loved the quiet. With fewer men to feed, her days took on a gentler rhythm. She spent mornings baking bread and preparing meals, afternoons reading by the fire, and evenings wrapped in Gideon's arms, learning the geography of marriage, the comfortable silences, the shared laughter, the way 2 people became one unit without losing themselves. "Tell me about your dreams," Gideon said one evening as wind howled outside and snow piled against the windows. They were in bed, the heavy quilts cocooning them against the cold. Dreams? Eliza traced patterns on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. For the future, for us, what do you want our life to look like 10 years from now? Eliza considered carefully. I want children, she said, a house full of noise and laughter. I want to teach them to read and to be kind. I want them to know their father is a good man, the best man. You'll be an excellent mother, Gideon said, his voice thick with emotion. Patient and loving, everything a child needs. And you, what do you dream of? This, Gideon said simply. Exactly this. You in my arms, safe and warm. A future where you never have to be afraid again. Maybe expanding the operations, building something lasting. But mostly, I just dream of growing old with you. That's a good dream, Eliza whispered. The best kind. They made love slowly that night, the cold world forgotten in the warmth they created together. And when Eliza fell asleep afterward, Gideon's arms around her, she dreamed of spring and new beginnings. Spring arrived like a promise kept. The snow melted, revealing mud and green shoots. The camp roared back to life as loggers returned from winter breaks, eager to work. Eliza threw herself into the bustle, managing the increased cookhouse demands with capable efficiency. But something was different. She felt it in the mornings, a queasy unsettledness that passed by noon. She noticed how her dresses fit tighter across the bust, how certain smells made her stomach turn. She knew what it meant. She'd seen it enough times in other women. But she waited, wanting to be certain before she told Gideon. It was Finn who confirmed it, oddly enough. The old logger found her behind the cookhouse one morning, retching into the bushes. "How far along?" he asked gently, offering her a handkerchief. 2 months, maybe 3, Eliza admitted, wiping her mouth. "How did you know?" "Raised 6 daughters," Finn said with a crooked smile. "Seen morning sickness enough times to recognize it. Does Gideon know?" "Not yet. I wanted to be sure." "He'll be over the moon," Finn predicted. "That man worships the ground you walk on. A baby will just give him one more thing to love." That evening, after supper had been served and the men had dispersed, Eliza found Gideon in their cabin, reviewing ledgers by lamplight. She stood in the doorway, suddenly nervous, despite knowing how he'd react. "Gideon," she said, "I need to tell you something." He looked up immediately, concern crossing his features. "What's wrong? Are you ill?" "Not ill, exactly." She moved to sit beside him, taking his large hand in both of hers. "I'm with child. We're going to have a baby." The ledger hit the floor with a thump. Gideon stared at her, his expression cycling through shock, disbelief, and finally pure joy. "A baby! Truly?" "Truly. I'd say you'll be a father come autumn." Gideon pulled her into his arms with a gentleness that belied his strength, burying his face in her hair. His shoulders shook, and Eliza realized with wonder that he was crying. "I never thought," he managed, "after Jacob died. I thought I'd lost my chance at family. And now you've given me everything. We're in this together." Eliza reminded him, her own tears flowing freely. "This baby is ours, made from love, born into safety. Everything we never had." They held each other as the lamp burned low, 2 people who'd found each other in darkness, now creating new light. Pregnancy transformed Eliza in ways she hadn't expected. Her body changed, swelling with new life. Some days she felt beautiful and powerful. Others, ungainly and exhausted. But through it all, Gideon was steadfast. He became almost comically protective. When she insisted on continuing her cookhouse duties, he hovered nearby, ready to lift anything heavier than a wooden spoon. He'd rearrange the cabin to eliminate any potential hazards, patting sharp corners and ensuring she had comfortable places to rest. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Eliza laughed one afternoon, when he'd physically lifted her over a puddle rather than let her walk through it. "You're carrying my child," Gideon said seriously. "The most precious cargo in the world. I'll not risk either of you." The men found his protectiveness endlessly amusing, but also touching. They went out of their way to make Eliza's work easier, chopping extra wood, hauling water, even attempting to cook on days when exhaustion kept her abed. Their efforts were clumsy but sincere, and Eliza found herself part of a family larger than just her and Gideon. As summer blazed into fullness, her belly grew round and prominent. She felt the baby move for the first time while kneading bread dough, a flutter like butterfly wings inside her. She gasped, her hands stilling. "Gideon!" she called. He was outside, but he heard the urgency in her voice and came running, axe still in hand. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." She grabbed his hand and pressed it to her belly. "Wait, feel." They stood frozen, waiting. And then it came again, a small push against Gideon's palm. His eyes went wide with wonder. "The baby," he breathed. "I felt the baby." "Our baby," Eliza corrected, "strong, like the father." Gideon knelt then, right there in the cookhouse, and pressed his forehead to her belly. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I'm your papa. I promise I'll keep you safe, teach you right from wrong, and love you with everything I am." Eliza ran her fingers through his dark hair, overwhelmed by the rightness of this moment. They'd both come from brokenness, but they were creating something whole and beautiful, a family built on love and choice rather than obligation and fear. Late summer brought complications. Eliza woke one night to cramping pain, worse than anything she'd experienced. She gasped, clutching her belly, and Gideon was instantly alert. "What is it?" "Pain," she managed. "Something's wrong." They rode through darkness to the nearest town with a real doctor, Gideon pushing his horse hard while holding Eliza secure in front of him. Every jostle made her whimper, and Gideon talked to her the entire way, his voice a lifeline in the darkness. "Stay with me, love. We're almost there. You're strong. The baby's strong. Just hold on." A gray-haired woman named Dr. Josephine Mercer examined Eliza with careful hands while Gideon paced outside, his massive frame wearing a path in the wooden floor. "The baby's fine," Dr. Mercer announced when she finally emerged. "Your wife is fine too, though she's been working too hard. The body sends warnings when it needs rest, Mr. Thorne." This was a warning. "What do I need to do?" Gideon asked immediately. "Keep her off her feet as much as possible for the next month. Light activity only. No lifting, no standing for hours at the cookhouse. She needs rest, good food, and calm." "Done," Gideon said without hesitation. "Whatever she needs." He carried Eliza to the wagon he'd borrowed from town, settled her on a nest of blankets, and drove home at a careful pace that must have tested his patience. But he never complained, just kept one hand on her leg, reassuring himself of her presence. Back at camp, he hired a temporary cook and installed Eliza in their cabin with strict orders to rest. The men took turns bringing her meals, books, and gossip from the camp. Finn carved toys for the coming baby. Even Dutch, the gruff foreman, presented her with a tiny pair of booties his wife had knitted. "You scared us," Dutch admitted gruffly. "Gideon was like a madman, riding out in the dark. Thought we might lose both of you." "We're tougher than we look," Eliza said, patting her belly. This baby's a fighter. Gets it from both parents, Dutch said with a rare smile. As Eliza rested and regained her strength, she realized how deeply she'd woven herself into this community. These rough loggers with their calloused hands and rough language had become her family. They'd protect her child as fiercely as they'd protected her. And Gideon, her gentle giant, barely left her side except when work demanded it. He read to her in the evenings, told her stories of his childhood, and planned aloud for their baby's future. "If it's a boy, I want to name him Jacob," Gideon said one evening, "after my brother, if that's all right with you." "It's perfect," Eliza said. "And if it's a girl?" "Sarah," Gideon said immediately, "after your mother." So our child carries both our histories, the good parts we want to remember. Jacob or Sarah Thorne, Eliza mused. Yes, those are good, strong names. Autumn arrived in a blaze of color. The trees surrounding the camp turned gold and crimson, and the air grew crisp. Eliza's time drew near, and everyone at camp walked on eggshells, waiting for the moment. It came on a cool October morning. Eliza woke to her water breaking and contractions that stole her breath. Gideon, who'd been sleeping lightly for weeks, was awake instantly. "It's time," Eliza gasped. Gideon had prepared for this. Dr. Mercer was already staying at camp, anticipating the birth. Within minutes, the doctor was in their cabin, sleeves rolled up, issuing calm orders, while Gideon held Eliza's hand and looked terrified. "I need you to be strong," Dr. Mercer told Gideon. "Your wife needs your strength now." Labor was brutal. Hours passed in waves of pain that left Eliza sobbing and exhausted. Gideon stayed by her side, letting her crush his hand, wiping her face with cool cloths and whispering encouragement. "You can do this," he murmured. "You're the strongest person I know. Just a little longer, love. Just a little longer." "I can't." Eliza wept at one particularly awful contraction. "I can't do this." "You can," Gideon insisted, "and you will. Because our baby needs you, and I need you. You've survived so much worse than this. This pain brings life, not death. You can do this." His certainty anchored her. When Dr. Mercer said push, Eliza pushed with everything she had. And finally, a baby's cry pierced the air. Strong, healthy, angry at being expelled from warmth into cold air. "A boy, Dr. Mercer announced, placing the squalling infant on Eliza's chest. A big, healthy boy. Jacob Thorne had his father's dark hair and his mother's delicate features. He was perfect. And when Gideon bent to kiss first his wife and then his son, tears streamed down his face unchecked. "Thank you," he whispered to Eliza. "Thank you for this gift. Thank you for everything. We made him together," Eliza said tiredly, cradling their son. "Out of love and hope, he's ours." Outside, when word spread that the baby had arrived healthy, the entire camp erupted in cheers. Finn fired his rifle in celebration, and someone broke out the whiskey they'd been saving for just this occasion. Inside the cabin, oblivious to the celebration, the new family of three existed in a bubble of wonder. Gideon held his son with trembling hands, marveling at the tiny perfection of him. And Eliza, exhausted but radiant, watched her husband fall in love all over again, this time with the child they'd created. "Welcome to the world, Jacob," Gideon whispered. "Your mama and I have been waiting for you. We're going to teach you everything. How to be strong but gentle, brave but kind. How to love with your whole heart and stand up for what's right. You're going to have the childhood we didn't, full of love and safety. I promise you that." The baby yawned, unimpressed by the promises, and Eliza laughed softly. "I think he just wants milk and sleep." "Smart boy," Gideon said, taking after his mother already. The years that followed Jacob's birth were the happiest of Eliza's life. Their son thrived, growing from a colicky infant into a curious toddler who followed his father everywhere, mimicking his walk and trying to lift axes far too heavy for his small arms. The company prospered. Gideon's reputation for fair dealing and quality timber spread, and contracts poured in. They built the big house, expanded to additional camps, and became pillars of the growing logging community. Eliza started her school, teaching not just reading and writing, but mathematics and science. She believed in education as a path to freedom, and she poured that belief into every lesson. The loggers' children, and eventually the loggers themselves, filled her classroom, hungry for knowledge. When Sarah arrived 2 years after Jacob, the family felt complete. Their daughter was a spitfire from birth, loud and demanding, and utterly fearless. She climbed trees before she could properly walk, and declared at age 3 that she would be a logger like Papa when she grew up. "We've created a force of nature," Gideon said with pride, watching Sarah attempt to drag a log twice her size across the yard. "She's yours through and through," Eliza laughed. "Strong and stubborn, and beautiful like her mother," Gideon added. "God help the boys who come courting in 15 years. Life wasn't without challenges. There were lean years when timber prices dropped, winters that were brutally cold, injuries and near misses that left Eliza's heart in her throat. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. On their 5th anniversary, Gideon surprised Eliza with a trip to Portland, their first time leaving the camp together since their wedding. They left the children with Finn's capable wife and spent 3 days in the city, staying at a real hotel with running water and electric lights. "This is all so modern," Eliza marveled, turning the light switch on and off repeatedly. "Do you miss it?" Gideon asked. "City life, conveniences?" "Not for a moment," Eliza said honestly. "Our life is perfect, exactly as it is. Though I wouldn't mind bringing some of these innovations to camp." They walked the city streets, hand in hand, visited shops and theaters, and ate at restaurants where they didn't have to cook. But the best part was simply being alone together, remembering who they were as a couple, beyond being parents and business owners. On their last night, as they lay in the hotel bed, Gideon pulled Eliza close. "These 5 years have been the best of my life," he said. "Every day with you is a gift I never thought I'd receive." "We saved each other," Eliza reminded him. "You gave me a home when I was homeless, safety when I was hunted, love when I thought I was unlovable. And you gave me a reason to live again," Gideon said. "After Jacob died, I was just going through motions. Then you walked into my camp, starving and scared but still brave, and suddenly I had purpose. You taught me that these hands," he held them up, large and scarred, "could create life, not just fell trees, could hold gently instead of just grip hard." "These hands have felled forests," Eliza whispered, taking his hands in hers. "But only with you do they tremble." Gideon finished, his voice rough with emotion. "Every time I touch you, every time I hold our children, my hands shake because I'm overwhelmed by how much I have to lose. But that trembling reminds me I'm alive, that I'm capable of love so deep it terrifies me." They made love that night with the desperation of 2 people remembering how close they'd come to never finding each other. And afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, they made promises for the next 5 years, and the 5 after that, and all the years to come. When they returned to camp, Jacob and Sarah ran to greet them, and Eliza felt her heart swell to bursting. This noisy, chaotic, beautiful life was everything she'd never dared dream of. That evening, as she tucked Jacob into bed, he asked her to tell him a story. "Once upon a time," Eliza began, "there was a girl who was lost and afraid. She wandered through dark forests and dangerous places, searching for somewhere safe. And then one day, she met a giant who lived among the trees. He was fierce and strong, but he had the gentlest heart. And when he looked at her, he didn't see someone broken. He saw someone worth saving. So he offered her shelter and safety, and slowly they built a life together. They had adventures and faced dangers, but they always faced them together. And eventually, that lost girl realized she wasn't lost anymore. She'd found her home." "Is that story about you and Papa?" Jacob asked sleepily. "Yes, baby. That's our story." "I like that story," Jacob yawned. "Tell it again tomorrow?" "Every day if you want," Eliza promised, kissing his forehead. "It's my favorite story, too." She found Gideon on the porch, Sarah asleep on his lap, and settled beside them. Together, they watched the sun set over the forest they'd built their life in, over the community they'd created, over the future they'd secured for their children. "Happy?" Gideon asked. "More than I ever thought possible," Eliza answered honestly. And as the stars emerged one by one overhead, the giant lumberjack and the woman he'd saved, who'd saved him right back, sat in perfect contentment, knowing that the best stories aren't the ones we're told, but the ones we live. Together, always together. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Gideon and Eliza's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.